Hello, good morning, or whenever you come across this. We're going to be getting back into the morning of the magicians, secret societies, conspiracies, and vanished civilizations today. And this is by Louis Pauwels and Jacques Bergier, or maybe Jacques. I'm not quite certain. All right, part one. The future perfect. 1. Salute to the reader in a hurry. A registration in 1875. Birds of ill omen. How the ninth century closed the doors. The end of science and the repression of fantasy. Poincare's despair. We are on our own grandfathers. And youth. I think that's a list of all of the sections in part 1. So 1. How can an intelligent man today not feel in a hurry? Get up, sir, you've got important things to do. But one has to rise earlier every day. Speed up your machines for seeing, hearing, thinking, remembering, and imagining. Our best reader, the one we value the most, will have finished with us in 2 or 3 hours. Wow, 2 or 3 hours, you think? There are men I know who can read with the greatest profit 100 pages of mathematics, philosophy, history, or archaeology in 20 minutes. Actors learn how to place their voice. Who will teach us to place our attention? At a certain height, everything changes speed. So far as this work is concerned, I'm not one of those writers who want to keep their readers with them as long as possible and lull them to sleep. I'm not interested in sleep, only in waking. Get on with it quickly. Take what you want and go. There's plenty to do outside. Skip chapters if you want to. Begin where you like and read in any direction. This book is a multiple use tool, like the knives campers use. For example, if you're afraid of arriving too slowly at the heart of the subject that interests you, skip these first pages. You should understand, however, that they show how the 19th century had closed its doors against fantasy as a positive element in man and the world and the universe, and how the 20th has opened them again. Although our morality, our philosophy, and our sociology, which ought to be contemporary with the future, are nothing of the kind and remain attached to the out-of-date 19th century. The bridge between the era of muskets and that of rockets hasn't yet been built, but it's being thought about. And the object of this book is to make people think about it harder. If we're in a hurry, it's not because we're crying over the past, but are worried about the present and getting impatient. There you have it. You know enough now to be able, if necessary, to skim through this introduction and push on further. His name is not recorded in the history books, unfortunately. He was a director of the American Patent Office, and it was he who first sounded the alarm. In 1875, he sent in his resignation to the Secretary of the Board of Trade. What's the good of going on? Is the gist of what he said. There's nothing left to invent. 12 years later, in 1887, the great chemist Marcellin Berthelot wrote, quote, "From now on, there is no mystery about the universe," end quote. 1887. Hey, Dean, welcome in, man. Good to see you. To get a coherent picture of the world's science, to get a coherent picture of the world's science had cleared everything up. Perfection by omission. Matter consisted of a certain number of elements, none of which could be turned into another. But while Berthelot, in his learned work, bollocks, man, I'm really struggling here. Good morning, Lucky. Good to see you. Hey, I got your email. I'm going to be responding to that quite soon. Thank you. So, where am I? I'm stumbling and a bumbling. So, yeah, because that sentence didn't. To get a coherent picture of the world, science had cleared everything up. Perfection by omission. Matter consisted of a certain number of elements, none of which could be turned into another. But while Berthelot, in his learned work, was rejecting the dreams of the alchemists, the elements, which knew nothing about this, continued to transmute themselves as a result of natural radioactivity. In 1852, the phenomenon had been described by Reichenbach, but was immediately repudiated. Repudiated. Let's look it up. Hey, thank you, man. Repute. To be known. Was immediately repudiated. Let's look that up. Oh. Back it up. Okay. Hey, Alex, good to see ya. Let's see here. Repudiated. There's too much stuffs. Okay. Repudiated. Definition. Refuse to accept or be associated. Oh, okay, so like a woman of ill repute. I wonder where they use the word ill if repute already means. Maybe I don't know. Refuse to accept or be associated with. Okie doke. Very good. But was immediately repudiated. Scientists before 1870 had referred to a fourth state of matter observed in gases. Any kind of mystery, however, had to be suppressed. Repression is the right word. Some 19th century thinking ought to be psychoanalyzed. A German named Zeppelin, returning home after fighting with the Southerners, tried to get the industrialists interested in a dirigible balloon. Quote, "Unhappy man, don't you know that there are 3 subjects which can no longer be the subject of a paper submitted to the French Academy of Science? The squaring of the circle, the tunnel under the channel, and dirigible balloons." Dude, the squaring of the circle. Juicy. End quote. Minus all that stuff I said about juicy. Another German, Hermann Gaswind, had the idea of building flying machines heavier than air to be propelled by rockets. On his 5th blueprint, the German war minister, after consulting the technicians, wrote, with the habitual moderation of his race and office, quote, "How long will it be before this bird of ill omen is finally bumped off?" End quote. The Russians, on their side, had got rid of another bird of ill omen. Kibolchik, who was also in favor of rocket-propelled flying machines, a firing squad saw to that. Oh, man. It is true that Kibolchik had used his technical skill to fabricate the bomb that had just cut up into little pieces the Emperor Alexander II, but it wasn't necessary to execute Professor Langley of the Smithsonian Institute, who had imagined flying machines propelled by the recently invented internal combustion engine. It was enough for him to be dishonored, ruined, and expelled from the Smithsonian. Professor Simon Newcomb proved mathematically the impossibility of a heavier-than-air machine. A few months before the death of Langley, who died of grief, a little English boy came back from school one day in tears. He had shown his companions the photograph of a design that Langley had just sent to his father. He declared that men would one day be able to fly. His comrades had laughed at him, and the schoolmaster had asked him how his father could be such a fool. The name of this fool was H.G. Wells. And so all the doors were closing with a bang. There was, in fact, nothing left to do but to resign. And Mr. Brunet, Brunetière in 1895 was able calmly to speak of the bankruptcy of science. The celebrated Professor Lippmann told one of his pupils about the same time that physics was a subject that had been exhausted and was finished and done with, and that he would do better to turn his attention in other directions. This pupil's name was Heilbronner, who later was to become the greatest authority in Europe on physical chemistry and make remarkable discoveries relating to liquid air, ultraviolet rays, and colloidal metals. Moissan, a chemist of genius, was forced to recant and declare in public that he had not manufactured diamonds, but had made a mistake during an experiment. It was useless to seek any further. The great discoveries of the century were the steam engine and the gas lamp, and no greater human inventions were possible. Electricity? A mere technical curiosity. A mad Englishman, Maxwell, had pretended that invisible light rays could be produced by means of electricity. This couldn't be taken seriously. A few years later, Ambrose Bierce wrote in his Devil's Dictionary, quote, "No one knows what electricity is, but in any case, it gives a better light than a horsepower and travels quicker than a gas jet," end quote. As for energy, this was something quite independent of matter and devoid of mystery. It was composed of fluids. These fluids filled everything up, could be described in equations of great formal beauty, and were intellectually satisfying. They could be electric, luminous, calorific, etc. Here was a continuous and obvious progression. Matter in its three states, solid, liquid, and gaseous, and the various energy fluids, more elusive even than gases. To preserve a scientific image of the world, it was only necessary to reject as philosophic dreams the theories about the atom that were beginning to take shape. Planck's and Einstein's grains of energy were still a very long way off. The German, Clausius, maintained that no source of energy other than fire was conceivable. And though energy may be preserved quantitatively, it deteriorates in quality. The universe has been wound up once and for all, like a watch, and will run down when the spring is worn out. No surprises are to be expected. Into this universe, whose destiny is foreseeable, life entered by chance and developed according to the simple laws of natural selection. At the apex of this evolution came man, a mechanical and chemical compound endowed with an illusion, consciousness. Under the influence of this illusion, man invented time and space, concepts of the mind. If you had told an official 19th century scientist that physics would one day absorb space and time and would study experimentally the curvature of space and the concentration, or rather the contraction of time, he would have summoned the police. Space and time have no real existence. They are the mathematicians' variables and subjects for philosophers to discuss at their leisure. There can be no connection between man and such immensities. Despite the work of Charcot, Breuer, Hislop, extrasensory and extratemporal perception is an idea to be rejected with scorn. Nothing unknown in the universe, nothing unknown in man. It was quite useless to attempt any internal exploration. Nevertheless, there was one fact that defied simplification: hypnotism. Ooh. People like the naive Flammarion, the skeptical Edgar Poe, and the suspect H.G. Wells were interested in this phenomenon. And yet, fantastic as this may seem, the 19th century proved officially that there was no such thing as hypnotism. Patients tend to tell lies and pretend in order to please the hypnotizer. That is true. However, since Freud and Morton Price We know that there is such a thing as a split personality. Thanks to a generally critical attitude, this century succeeded in creating a negative mythology, in eliminating any trace of the unknown in man, and in repressing any suggestion of mystery. Biology, too, was finished. M. Claude Bernard had exhausted its possibilities, and the conclusion had been reached that the brain secreted thoughts as the liver secretes bile. Doubtless, it would soon be possible to analyze this secretion and write out its chemical formula to fit in with the pretty patterns of hexagons for which M. Berthelot was famous. As soon as we discover how the hexagons of carbon combine to create mind, the last page will have been turned. Let's get on with the job and have all the madmen shut up. One fine day in 1898, a certain serious-minded gentleman forbade the governess to allow his children to read Jules Verne. These false ideas would only deform their young minds. The gentleman's name was Edward Branly. He had just decided to abandon his experiments with sound waves as being devoid of interest and take up the career of a general practitioner. Scientists have to give up their throne, but they also have to get rid of the adventures, that is to say, people who think and dream and are endowed with imagination. Berthelot attacked the philosophers, quote, fencing with their own ghosts in the solitary field of abstract logic, end quote. A good description, that, of Einstein, for example. And Claude Bernard declared that, quote, a man who discovers the simplest fact does a greater service than the greatest philosopher in the world, end quote. Science can only be experimental. Without it, we are lost. Shut the gates. Nobody will ever be the equal of the giants who invented the steam engine. In this organized, comprehensible, and yet doomed universe, the place assigned to man was that of an epiphenomenon. Oh no, this is a huge word. Oh wait, epiphenomenon. Epiphenomenon. Okay, I get it. An epiphenomenon. Let's still look it up. That's so cool. I've never seen that word before. Okay. Repudiated. Okay. Epiphenomenon. A secondary effect or byproduct that arises from but does not casually influence a process. Wow, I'm glad we looked that up. Okay, so epiphenomenon. Let's see if that's how you say it. Yeah, a secondary effect or byproduct that arises from but does not casually influence a process. Wow. That is something, man. It seems illogical. A secondary effect or byproduct that arises from but does not casually influence a process. Juicy. Hey, Gators, good to see you, man. Welcome in. Epiphenomenon. Oh, shoot. Where am I in here? Here it is. There could be no utopia and no hope. Coal deposits would be exhausted in a few hundred years, and humanity would perish by cold and starvation. Men would never fly and would never travel through space, nor would they ever explore the bottom of the sea. Strange that this ban should have been imposed on any investigation of the ocean depths. From a technical point of view, there was nothing in the 19th century to prevent Professor Picard from constructing his bathyscape. Nothing but an extreme timidity and concern that man should, quote, stay in his proper place, end quote. Turpin, who invented melinite, was promptly jailed. The inventors of the internal combustion engine were discouraged, and an attempt was made to show that electric machines were merely forms of perpetual motion. Those were the days when the great inventors were persecuted, isolated, and in revolt. Hertz wrote to the Dresden Chamber of Commerce that research into the transmission of the Hertzian waves should be discouraged, as they could not be used for any practical purpose. Napoleon III's experts proved that Graham's dynamo could never function. As for the first automobiles, the submarine, the dirigible balloon, and electric light, quote, none of that fellow Edison's swindles, end quote. The learned societies were not interested. There is an immoral entry in the minutes of the Paris Academy of Sciences recording the reception of the first photograph. Quote, no sooner had the machine emitted a few words than the permanent secretary threw himself upon the impostor, presenting it, seizing his throat in a grip of iron. Quote, you see, gentlemen, he exclaimed, what it is. End quote. But, you see, gentlemen, what it is. But to the stupefaction of everyone present, the machine continued to utter sounds. Nevertheless, some great minds, profoundly disconnected with the situation, were secretly preparing the most formidable revolution in human knowledge in the history of mankind. For the time being, however, every avenue was barred in every direction, in front and in the rear. The fossils of pre-human creatures that were beginning to be discovered in large numbers were not taken seriously. Did not the great Heinrich Helmholtz prove that the sun derived its energy from its own contractions, that is to say, its own combustion, from the only force existing in the universe? And did not his calculations show that the sun had not been in existence for more than about 100,000 years? How then could there have been a long process of evolution? Moreover, it would never be possible to fix a date for the beginning of the world. In the short interval between two states of nothingness, we human epiphenomena must be serious. Epiphenomena, it says in quotes. Facts, nothing but facts. As their researches into matter and energy had met with little encouragement, the best among the inquiring minds turned to explore an impasse, the ether, a substance that permeates matter in all its forms and acts as a vehicle for luminous and electromagnetic waves. It is at once both infinitely solid and infinitely tenuous. Lord Rayleigh, who at the end of the 19th century represented official English science in all its splendor, formulated the theory of a gyroscopic ether, an ether consisting of a mass of spinning tops turning in all directions and reacting on one another. Aldous Huxley has remarked since that, quote, if it is possible for a human invention to convey the idea of absolute ugliness, then Lord Raleigh's theory has succeeded, end quote. Dude, I need to cough. I'll be right back. Oh, I hope I got it. Scientists everywhere were engaged in speculations on the ether on the eve of the 20th century. Then, in 1898, came a catastrophe. The Michelson-Morley experiment shattered the hypothesis of the ether. All the work of Henry Poincaré bears witness to this collapse. Poincaré, a mathematician of genius, felt crushed by the enormous weight of this 19th century prison, the destroyer of all fantasy. He would have discovered the theory of relativity had he dared, but he did not dare. His books, La Valeur de la Science, La Science et l'Hypothèse, The Value of Science and the Hypothesis, are expressions of despair and abdication. For him, a scientific hypothesis is never true and can at best be useful. Like the Spanish inn, you only find there what you bring yourself. According to Poincaré, I hope I'm saying that right. The accent is over the E at the end. If the universe contracted 1,000,000 times and ourselves with it, nobody would notice anything. Such speculations are therefore useless because they have no connection with reality as we perceive it. This argument, up to the beginning of this century, was cited as a model of profound reasoning until one day a practical engineer pointed out that the butcher, at any rate, would notice it, as all his joints would fall down. The weight of a leg of mutton is proportional to its volume, but the strength of a piece of string is proportional only to its length. Therefore, when the universe to contract by only 1,000,000th of a degree, there would be no more joints hanging from the ceiling. Poor, great, and dear Poincaré. It was this great thinker who wrote, quote, "Common sense alone is enough to tell us that the destruction of a town by a pound of metal is an evident impossibility," end quote. The limited nature of the physical structure of the universe, the non-existence of atoms, restricted sources of fundamental energy, the inability of a mathematical formula to yield more than it already contains, the futility of intuition, the narrowness and absolutely mechanical nature of man's internal world, these were the things the scientists believed in, and this attitude of mind applied to everything and created the climate which permeated every branch of knowledge in this century. A minor century? No, a great century, but narrow, a dwarf stretched out. Wow, I love that. I got an itch on my back right here. Whew, that's good. But suddenly, the doors so carefully closed by the 19th century in the face of the infinite possibilities of man, of matter, of energy, of time, and of space are about to burst asunder. Science and technical skills will make enormous progress, and a new assessment will be made of the very nature of knowledge. Not merely progress, this, but a transformation. In this new state of the world, consciousness itself acquires a new status. Today, in every domain, all forms of imagination are rampant, except in those spheres where our historical life goes on, stifled, unhappy, and precarious, like everything that is out of date. An immense gulf separates the man of adventure from humanity, and our societies from our civilization. We are living with ideas of morality, sociology, philosophy, and psychology that belong to the 19th century. We are our own great-great-grandfathers. As we watch rockets rising to the sky and feel the ground vibrating with 1,000 new radiations, we are still smoking the pipe of Thomas Graindorge. Our literature, our philosophical discussions, our ideological conflicts, our attitude toward reality, all this is still slumbering behind the doors that have been burst open. Youth, youth, go forth and tell the world that everything is opened up and already the outside has come in. Hey, Dustin, good morning. Good to see you, man. Oh, so wait, maybe that, I guess now I know that I was wrong. So 1 was what this was. Okay, this was like a mini description of what 1 is. And here's a mini description of what 2 is. Burgess Delights. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Bourgeois. Burgess Delights. A crisis for the intelligence, or the hurricane of unrealism, glimpses of another reality, beyond logic and literary philosophies, the idea of an eternal present, science without conscience or conscience without science, and hope. Quote, the Countess had her tea at 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock, end quote. Valerie said something to the effect, or Valerie said something to the effect that the kind of thing, third time's a charm. Valerie said something to the effect that that kind of thing would not be written by anyone who had gained an entrance to the world of ideas 1,000 times stronger, more romantic, and more real than the world of the heart and senses. Quote, Anthony loved Mary, who loved Paul. They were very unhappy and had lots of little nothings, end quote. A whole literature to describe the palpitations of a mass of amoeba and infusoria, whereas humans' thought, with a capital T, gives rise to tragedies and gigantic dramas, transmutes human beings, alters the course of whole civilizations, and enrolls in its service vast sections of the human race. As to sporadic pleasure and Bergier delights, the workers of the earth, devotees of intellectual enlightenment, are well aware of all that they contain in the way of insignificance, decadence, and rottenness. Okay, wait, let's look up that Bergier word. Bourge. I see where I am. Oh, it's bourgeois, bourgeoisie, of a characteristic of the middle class, typically with reference to its perceived materialistic values or conventional attitudes. A rich, bored, bourgeois family. I'm glad I looked that up. I was saying it totally wrong. Bourgeois. At the end of the 19th century, the bourgeois theater and novel were in their heyday, and for a time, the literary generation of 1885 paid homage to Anatole France and Paul Bourget. Nevertheless, about the same time, a much more important and exciting drama than any in which the characters of Divorce or Les Lys Rouges, which means the Red Lily, were involved was being played out in the sphere of pure knowledge. The dialogue between materialism and spiritualism, science and religion, suddenly entered on a new and exciting phase. The scientists who had inherited the positivism of Taine and Renan were confronted with staggering discoveries that were to demolish the strongholds of incredulity. Where hitherto only a reality that was well vouched for could be believed in, suddenly the unreal became a possibility, and things were viewed from the standpoint of a romantic intrigue, with the transformation of characters, the intrusion of traitors, conflicting passions, and illusory decisions. The principle of the conversation of energy was established as a certainty, solid as a rock, and yet here was radium, producing energy without acquiring it from any source. No one doubted that light and electricity were identical. They could only proceed in a straight line and were incapable of traversing any obstacle. And yet here were X-rays that could go through solid objects. In the discharge tubes, matter seemed to disappear or be transformed into particles of energy. The transmutation of the elements was taking place in nature radium turns into helium or lead. And so the temple of consecrated beliefs is ready to collapse. Reason no longer reigns supreme. It seemed that anything was possible. The scientists who were supposed to have the monopoly of knowledge suddenly ceased to make a distinction between physics and metaphysics, between fact and fantasy. The pillars of the temple dissolve into clouds, and the high priests of Descartes are dumbfounded. If the theory of the conservation of energy is false, what is there to prevent a medium from manufacturing an ectoplasm out of nothing? If magnetic waves can traverse the earth, why should thought transmission not be possible? If all known bodies emit invisible forces, why should there not be astral bodies? If there is a fourth dimension, could this be the spirit's world? Madame Marie Curie, Sir William Crookes, and Oliver Joseph Lodge go in for table turning. Thomas Edison tries to construct a machine for communicating with the dead. How do I say this name? Guglielmo Marconi, in 1901, thought he had intercepted messages from Mars. Simon Newcomb was not surprised when a medium materialized seashells fresh from the Pacific. Whoa! The seekers after reality are bowled over by strong blasts of the fantastic and the unreal. But the stalwarts, the old guard, endeavor to stem the flood. The positivists, in the name of truth and of reality, reject everything en bloc. X-rays, ectoplasm, atoms, spirits of the dead, the fourth phase of matter, and the idea of there being inhabitants on Mars. And so begins a conflict between fantasy and reality, a conflict often seemingly absurd, blind, and confused, but one that will soon have repercussions on all forms of thought in every sphere: literature, sociology, philosophy, morals, and aesthetics. But in the physical sciences, order will be reestablished not through retreat or the whittling down of claims, but thanks to fresh advances. A new conception of physics takes shape due to the efforts of titans such as Perrin, Einstein, and Langevin, Langevin. In new science is born less dogmatic than the old ones. Doors are opened into a different kind of reality. As in all great novels, in the end, there are neither good nor bad characters, and all the heroes are right, so long as the novelist's ideas are directed toward a contemporary dimension where all their destinies converge and become one, and are raised together to a higher level. How do we stand today? Doors have been thrown open in almost all the strongholds of science, but that of physics has lost almost all its walls to become a cathedral entirely built of glass, wherein can be seen the reflections of another world infinitely near. Matter has been shown to be as rich, if not richer, in possibilities than the spirit. The energy it contains is incalculable. Its resources can only be guessed at. It can undergo an infinite number of transformations. The term materialist, in its 19th century connotation, has become meaningless. And so has the expression rationalist. The logic of common sense is no longer valid. In the new physics, a proposition can be both true and false. AB no longer equals BA. An entity can be at once continuous and discontinuous. Physics can no longer be relied on to determine what is or is not possible. One of the most astonishing signs of the breach that has been made in the domain of physics is the introduction of what has been called the strangeness quantum number. What has happened is roughly as follows. At the beginning of the 19th century, it was believed, somewhat naively, that two, or at most three, numbers were enough to define a particle, referring respectively to its mass, its electric charge, and its magnetic moment. This turned out to be very far from the truth. In order to define completely a particle, another dimension, which cannot be expressed in words, has to be allowed for, known as spin. It was believed at first that this dimension corresponded to a period in the particle's rotation on itself, rather like the period of 24 hours, which, in the case of the planet Earth, regulates the alteration of night and day. However, it soon became clear that the explanation could not possibly be as simple as that. The spin was simply the spin, the quantity of energy connected with the particle, envisaged mathematically as a rotation, although nothing whatever within the particle actually turns. In spite of erudite research carried out notably by Professor Louis de Broglie, the mystery of the spin has only been partially explained. Then suddenly, the discovery was made that among the three known particles, protons, electrons, and neutrons, that their mirror reflections, the negative antiproton, positron, and antineutron, there were at least 30 other particles. The cosmic rays, the great accelerators, produce them in enormous quantities. But to describe these particles, the three numbers used hitherto, mass, charge, magnetic moment, no longer sufficed. It was necessary to create a fourth, perhaps a fifth number, or even more. And so, quite naturally, the physicist called these new dimensions strangeness quantum numbers. There is something supremely poetic about this salute to the angel of the bizarre. Like many other expressions used in modern physics, forbidden radiation, absolute elsewhere, strangeness quantum number, has overtones which seem to go beyond physics to rejoin the more profound regions of the human mind. Take a sheet of paper, pierce two holes in it, close together. Obviously, common sense tells us an object small enough to go through these holes will go through either one or the other. But the same criterion, an electron is an object. No, by the same criterion, an electron is an object. It has a definite weight and produces a ray of light when it strikes a television screen and a shock when it hits a microphone. Here we have, then, an object small enough to go through one of our two holes. Now, the electron microscope will tell us that the electron has gone through both holes at the same time. What? If it has gone through one, it can't have gone through the other at the same time. But indeed, it has gone through both. It sounds crazy, but the experiment has been made. Attempts to explain it have led to the formulation of various theories, notably that of wave mechanics. But this theory is still not a complete explanation of a fact that defies reason, which can only function in terms of yes or no, A or B. In order to understand it, the very structure of our reason will have to be changed. Our philosophy is based on thesis and antithesis. But it looks as if, in the philosophy of the electron, thesis and antithesis, or is it antithesis? Yo, baby, good to see you. Welcome in. Good morning. Good afternoon. But it looks as if in the philosophy of the electron, thesis and antithesis are both true at the same time. Are we talking about absurdities? The electron seems to obey laws, and television, for example, is a reality. Does the electron exist or not? What nature calls existence is not existence in our eyes. In an electron, something, or mother of pearls. Let me take a sip. Let's try that again. So, what nature calls existence is not existence in our eyes. Is an electron something or nothing? The question is meaningless. And so, at the extreme limits of knowledge, our normal methods of thought and the literary philosophies, born of an outdated outlook on the world, simply disappear. The Earth is part of the universe. Man is not only in contact with that planet he inhabits. Cosmic rays, radio astronomy, and theoretical physics reveal the contracts he has with the cosmos as a whole. We no longer live in a closed world, as no intelligent person in tune with our times can have failed to notice. How then, in these circumstances, is it possible for a thinking man to be still preoccupied with problems that are not even planetary, but narrowly regional and provincial, or provincial? And how can our psychology, as revealed in works of fiction, remain so enclosed and confined to the analysis of the subconscious impulses of human sensuality and sentimentality? While millions of civilized people read books and go to the cinema or the theater to see how Francois can be in love with Renee, and yet, through her hatred of her father's mistress, revenge herself by becoming a lesbian, there are scientists making a celestial music out of mathematics who are speculating as to whether space does not contract. That makes a big difference. As Mother of Pearls, that's a big sentence. I'm going to do the whole thing again. While millions of civilized people read books and go to the cinema or the theater to see how Francois can be in love with Renee, and yet, through her hatred of her father's mistress, revenge herself by becoming a lesbian, there are scientists making a celestial music out of mathematics who are speculating as to whether space does not contract around a vehicle. The whole universe would then be accessible. One could visit the farthest star in the space of a lifetime. If equations like these could be verified, human thinking would be revolutionized. If mankind is no longer confined to this earth, new questions will have to be asked with regard to the deeper aspects of initiation and the possibility of making contact with intelligent beings from beyond. What then is our position today? As regards research into the structure of space and time, our notions of past and future are no longer valid. Where particles are concerned, time travels in the two directions simultaneously, past and future. At very high speeds, at the velocity of light, for example, where does time come in? We are in London in October 1944. A V-2 rocket traveling at 3,107 miles per hour is over the city. It is about to fall. But to what does this about to apply? As regards the occupants of the house, which in a moment will be destroyed, and who have only their eyes and ears, the V2 is indeed about to fall. But from the point of view of the radar operator, using waves traveling at 186,411 miles per second, a speed which makes the rocket appear to be crawling, the trajectory of the bomb is already traced. He can only watch. There is nothing he can do. Humanly speaking, nothing can now intercept the engine of death. No warning can be given. In the eyes of the operator, the rocket has already crashed. At the speed of radar, time is practically non-existent. The occupant of the house are about to die. In the radar's eyes, they are already dead. Another example. When the cosmic rays reach the Earth's surface, they are found to contain particles. Oh, I was just learning about... Wait, is this different? Masons, muons. Yeah, muons are different. The muons, which live on the mesons, mesons. The mesons, which live on Earth only for a millionth of a second, destroying themselves by radioactivity. I don't understand what I just read. Another example. When the cosmic rays reach the Earth's surface, they are found to contain particles. The mesons, which live on Earth only for a millionth of a second, destroying themselves by radioactivity. Now, these particles are born 19 miles up in the air when the atmosphere of our planet is beginning to be dense. So by the time they have covered this distance, they have already exceeded their lifespan by our reckoning. But their time is not ours. Their journey was made in eternity, and they only entered time when they lost their energy on arriving at sea level. Apparatus in this thought could be built to reproduce these conditions. In this way, drawers of time, as it were, could be created in which objects enjoying only a brief span of life would be placed and preserved in the fourth dimension. This receptacle could be a hollow glass ring placed in a field of intense energy in which the particles would rotate so rapidly that for them, time would practically have ceased to exist. A lifespan of a millionth of a second might thus be maintained and observed for minutes or even hours. Time travel, man. Thank you, yo baby. Quote, it must not be supposed it must not be supposed that past time vanishes into the void. Time is one and eternal, of which past, present, and future are only different aspects, different passings, if you like, of a continuous, invariable recording of perpetual existence, end quote. The modern disciples of Einstein recognized nothing but an eternal present, which was also what the ancient mystics believed. If the future exists already, then precognition is a fact. The whole trend of advanced knowledge is to place the laws of psychics and biology and psychology as well in a four-dimensional continuum. That is to say, in the eternal present. Oh, that was the end of the sentence. That is to say, in the eternal present. Concurrent time, y'all. Past, present, and future are. Perhaps it is only our consciousness that moves. For the first time, consciousness is admitted in its own right into the equations of theoretical physics. In this eternal present, matter appears as a slender thread stretched between past and future. Along this thread glides human consciousness. By what means is it able to modify the tensions of this thread so as to have an influence on events? One day we shall know, and psychology will then become a branch of physics. And no doubt there is a place for freedom within this eternal present. Quote, the traveler in a boat on the Seine. Wait, isn't that a river? Capital Seine. It's like a famous one, right? Oh no. Let's just find out where it is. Do you guys know? The Seine River. Seine. Wait, Seine. Seine River. I wrote Tibet. Oops. River. It's in Paris. Dude, I wish I would have said it out loud. I thought that it was. How do you say it though? Paris, France. let's see, pronunciation. Sen. Thank you. Okay, so where are you, River? Quote, the traveler in a boat on the Seine, okay, let's try again. The traveler in a boat on the Seine knows in advance what bridges he will encounter. He nonetheless has freedom of action and is capable of foreseeing anything that could happen en route, end quote. Freedom to become in the midst of an eternity which is a double vision, an admirable vision of human destiny bound up with that of the whole universe. If I had my life to live again, I should certainly not choose to be a writer and spend my days in a backward society where adventure is kept under the bed like a dog. I should want a lion-like adventure. I would go in for theoretical physics in order to live at the very heart of true romance. I love that paragraph. The new world of physics explicitly contradicts the philosophies of despair and nonsense. Science without conscience spells ruin for the soul, but conscience without science means ruin too. These philosophies, which are all the rage in Europe, these philosophies, which were all the rage in Europe in the 20th century, were nothing but phantoms of 19th century creeds dressed up in the new fashions. Real, objective knowledge in the field of technology and science, which sooner or later englobes the domain of sociology, teaches us that the history of mankind follows a definite path, accompanied by an increase in man's powers, a rise in the general level of intelligence, and a compulsive force which acts on the masses, transforming them into active thinkers, and giving them access to a civilization where life will be as much superior to ours as ours is now to that of the animals. That's questionable. Thought about thought and all that. The literary philosophers had been telling us that man is capable of understanding the world. Andre Marrois, it's Maurois, in The Return of Dr. O'Grady, for example, wrote as follows, quote, yet you will admit, Doctor, that 19th century man believed that science would one day be able to explain the universe. Renan, Berthelot, Taine, early in their lives, hoped that this would come about. 20th century man has no such hopes. He knows that discoveries only make the mystery deeper. As to progress, we have seen how man, with all his powerful resources, has only succeeded in producing famine, terror, disorder, torture, and contusion in the mind. What hope is there left? Why do you go on living, Doctor? End quote. The point of fact, however, the problem could no longer be stated in these terms. Did I say that right? In point in fact. In point in fact, however, the problem could no longer be stated in these terms. Though the protagonists in this discussion were unaware of it, the circle was already closing around the mystery, and the progress, so bitterly decreed, was opening the gates of heaven. We do not turn to Berthelot or Taine for enlightenment on the future of mankind, but rather to men like Teilhard de Chardin. At a recent discussion between representatives of the various scientific disciplines, the following idea was put forward. One day, perhaps, the ultimate secrets of the elementary particles will be revealed to us by what takes place deep down in the brain. For it is here that the most complex reactions in our region of the universe are finally registered, and the brain, no doubt, contains in itself the laws which govern the most profound mysteries of this region. The world is not absurd, and the mind is surely not capable of understanding it. On the contrary, it may well be that the human mind has already understood the world, but doesn't know that yet. Juicy. Reading this book, I think this is where I'm going to call it 1 hour. We'll get into the third section of part 1 next time. But when I read this stuff, it draws my attention to television and how growing up, it's like a huge distraction. I'm thankful for, how technology has connected us around the world. I wouldn't know any of you awesome people, but I think about those thoughts that, like they were talking about in here, how our thoughts have, it's like it's a broadcast. We are broadcasters and receivers, and man, it feels like a hijacking of thought. All of these deep thinkers, I don't know, maybe we are just in those teenage years of growth as humanity, because it does seem like people now are not trusting legacy media as they shouldn't, and relying more on their own experiences and what they're seeing with their own eyes, and connecting with people around the world to discuss and understand where they're coming from. There's also a great divide among that. It's almost like people holding on to the way things were, and then also this completely progressive, totally out of left field. I don't know, it's all kind of muddled. It would be cool though if, I don't know. I'm grateful for life. The whole TV thing and growing up in that, and us all being so preoccupied by that. There's so much time that we spent doing these things, and that's what life has become, and that's okay. Here we are now. But it's like, what if we weren't doing those things when we were growing up, being influenced by television? And, what if we were reading more books? And now it's like the scientific community, the elites, in control of like all of what's going to be printed in health and science. You have to be, I don't know. It's a club. It's sort of the same and different. Anyways, I'm glad to be alive. So anyways, thanks for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this. That was a struggle for me this morning into the afternoon. I hope you have a good day, and I will see you guys later. Thank you.